Greetings, all. It is February 1st, 2023. First of all, I want to say that I'm doing a lot of this stuff because I'm hoping it may help people clarify their thinking and then be able to express themselves a little bit more clearly and effectively about some of these key issues and challenges that we're facing these days. It may seem silly or ridiculous or who am I? What difference does my opinion make? But a lot of these issues are actually really important. A lot of the things that we need to be doing in the world right now are being held back by these recalcitrant and reactionary forces. Like, for example, the environment. It's extremely important for humanity and for the future and for future generations. So we need to be able to articulate ourselves very clearly and logically to combat a lot of these dark forces. And that's why I'm doing this. This whole subject of wokeism seems to be driving people crazy. We have places like Florida where teachers are concerned about being charged or imprisoned or fined or having books on hand that do not adhere to the political ideology of the government. I mean, this is fascism. Fascism and book burning go hand in hand. But what's really driving all this? As our consciousness has raised over recent years and decades, we have begun to increasingly find that a lot of the old ideas and paradigms from the past are simply unacceptable. And if you went back, say, for example, to the 1970s, you would find society has changed incredibly since then. And I would argue that the rate of evolution has increased even further in the past 5 years or 10 years. More and more people are openly expressing their individual uniqueness around their sexual identity and things like that. I mean, fundamentally, I couldn't care less. What difference does it make to me? None. It's not threatening to me. I think people who are threatened by those kinds of things are fundamentally really insecure. I mean, why else would it bother you? if I mean, unless you're concerned about your own sexuality on some deep level that perhaps you're unwilling to express, like maybe you're closeted or you have some fetish or something like that, or you're really insecure about your sexual prowess. Who cares? Unless you're afraid of it, like a little child, like a little insecure infant. Not that there's anything wrong with infants. And so this backlash against wokeism, which, when you really think about it, who doesn't want to be awake? The irony is so absurd because basically what these people are saying is that we want to go back to sleep. We don't want to know what we know. We want to rewrite history and pretend that none of this is happening. It's a form of escapism. And on the other side, you have people saying, well, look, we have to acknowledge past wrongs and how people are discriminated against in society unfairly and unjustly, whether it's racial, ethnic, sexual identity, or whatever. Fair enough. That's just mature. But the people who are freaking out about this, like I said, are highly insecure and immature. And again, the whole irony around the word woke. It's so funny because things are so polarized that literally we have wokeism versus anti-wokeism, or being awake and being aware versus being asleep and being unaware. And we all know who wins in that case. I mean, the people who are denying reality are going to fail miserably in one way or another. It's inevitable. You can't deny reality and function normally or sustainably. So the outcome is actually predetermined. It's just a question of how long it takes. The concern, of course, is that they're dragging us down with them. And so as people have been becoming more aware, they have been expressing themselves more overtly, as I said, and this backlash is coming from this contingent who doesn't want to hear what other people experience, think, or feel because it makes them uncomfortable. And their strategy then is to shut down this whole segment of society simply because they don't want to hear what they have to say or what they think or experience. And let's face it, a lot of it is thinly veiled racism, like banning African American studies. How could that conceivably harm anyone? How could studying history be detrimental or harmful to society? The only explanation is that it's racially motivated because it makes no logical sense whatsoever. Again, there's a huge irony here because what's happening is that the right wing is canceling stuff everywhere, like in schools and universities and corporations like Disney and voter suppression laws and hostile takeovers of social media companies. I mean, it goes on and on and on. This is all an attempt to suppress voices that make them feel insecure and uncomfortable because they're juvenile. So I'm all for wokeism. I'm 100% behind looking at reality and history from an objective and rational perspective instead of engaging in some kind of fanciful, wishful thinking that happens to only benefit one portion of society, which is white people. I mean, this is why they have to resort to so much misinformation and disinformation because they can't win this debate rationally. They have to cheat because the fundamental concepts they're trying to promote are indefensible and erroneous. There is no rational justification for many of these policies. It went so far as to almost end up in a violent takeover of the US government, a coup. I mean, you don't need to do a coup unless you can't attain power by legitimate means. So, assuming that the level of consciousness continues to raise here, and because of the astrology and everything else, I don't see why it won't, I wouldn't want to be on that side of the polarization because it won't end well. It can't unless we go into some kind of truly dystopic future. So none of it makes sense. None of it's rational. Being awake should be applauded. This is all about infantile insecurity and immaturity with a dash of criminality and belligerent ignorance and denial of reality. It's as if the right wing thinks that reality is optional or discretionary, like we can simply choose reality and define it the way we want, as opposed to the way it actually is. Like your sexual orientation is optional. Again, there's an irony in that, though, because if that's true, it suggests a diversity of options. In other words, that there isn't just one way to be, that you can choose how to be from some smorgasbord of realities. In their world, though, even though there are all these realities to choose from, you have to pick the right one, and it has to be the one that they approve of, the one with their particular stamp of approval, as if they are in a position to determine what everybody else should think and experience. Now, to me, that sounds like delusions of grandeur, or even thinking that you're God, that for some reason you are in a position to determine what other people should think. It's very arrogant when you think about it. And they have a very fixed idea about what reality should look like. And if people don't adhere to that, they find that very threatening and unsettling. So they have a very rigid, defined reality. Now, I suspect that if you actually drilled down into that on an individual basis, you would actually find that even amongst Republicans, there would actually be a diversity of opinion when you get into more nuanced aspects of this question. And then how do you settle those differences? Because what they want it seems, is a reality that is very clearly and rigidly defined, and there's very little tolerance for anything that doesn't fit within that definition. But who defines what reality is? Who gets to decide what's acceptable and what isn't? Even in religion, you have all these various factions who seem to be aligned, but I suspect that on a deep level, they actually have different worldviews. In a fascist state or a cult, it's the leader who defines reality for everybody else. And anything that doesn't strictly adhere to that definition of reality is harshly punished, sometimes with death. That's how scary it can get, right? So the whole world ends up living in some narcissist's nightmare. And even then, they inevitably meet some resistance that typically crushes them and their whole movement. It's very bizarre. The point, though, is that in the age of Aquarius, there will be a broad diversity of realities that coexist, because that's what Aquarius really represents, is unique individual expression, which is why I argue that this whole thing is doomed to fail. What I'm saying is that there is actually no cohesion. The only thing all of these people have in common is that they are completely freaked out and insecure about everyone else's reality. They don't want to feel any guilt or social responsibility or accountability. And so that's why they are engaged in this anti-woke movement. And this is why they are so freaked out about cancel culture, because fundamentally they don't want to be held accountable for their abhorrent views. It's kind of like killing the messenger. The message is, who cares? Go ahead and do your own thing. As long as it works for you and you're not hurting anybody else, it doesn't matter. But for some reason, to these people, it really matters what you think and what you do, as in you, the listener, which is why they want to ban books, for example. Basically, what I'm saying is that these people are fundamentally highly insecure, fragile, like the snowflakes they accuse everyone else of being, because that's what you do. You project your own weaknesses onto others, and they're highly immature. So like for example, Florida wants to ban offshore drilling off the coast for oil, but they applaud it when it happens everywhere else. It's so hypocritical. I mean, you could go on and on for years about this kind of stuff, but I mainly just wanted to point out why this anti-woke movement is really rooted in fear and insecurity. And those are not qualities that the rest of us want to emulate, and nor should we, because you can't exist in a world, especially a world that is facing increasing environmental threats. Like now, it appears that we're going to be probably passing 2 degrees Celsius by mid-century and passing 1.5 in the next 10 years. You can't engage with that scenario being in denial, or you're going to get hit hard. There's just no two ways about it. The rest of us know that, but they don't. Actually, Florida is one of the last places you should be geographically for a variety of reasons. The fact that it's so close to sea level, it's very prone to hurricanes, and it's equatorial. I'm saying a lot of things that I think are absolutely 100% true, but I also sense that there's a lot of people who simply don't want to hear it. The fact that people do not want to hear reality, I find very disturbing. And I'm not saying I'm the only person saying this stuff. I'm not. There's not a lot of people talking about it from a spiritual perspective. Not a lot at all. Maybe a few. These are hard truths, and we can't afford to be in a position of denial. So until this all settles out, what you can do is you can make wise decisions on your own behalf, like where you live and who you're surrounded with. Do you want to live in a state like Florida where the state government is aggressively and deliberately detached from reality? I would feel very uncomfortable living under that kind of governance. I was listening to a podcast today and they were talking about this whole issue of history and how history is interpreted and the political culture war debates around history. And the whole time I'm thinking, like, why are we even talking about whether or not history is legitimate? It is what it is. You can't just rewrite history. It's documented. It's not a ideological thing. It's factual, right? I mean, within history, there are ideological components, but the outcomes and results are factual. It's not debatable. Like the fact that we're even debating this is kind of insane. In fact, that is another blatantly fascistic tactic to rewrite history. It's really Orwellian. People need to start calling DeSantis what he is before it's too late. So this polarization is incredible. Like normally in the past, we would never have even debated these kinds of things. These people would have just been treated like they were kooks or conspiracy theorists and discredited and ignored. And now they are amongst the upper echelon of the federal government in the United States. Like you couldn't make this up. It's bizarre. The younger generations, I don't think are going to have as much of a problem with this as the older generations, but that transition will take some time. Anyway, the whole thing about wokeism being a threat is a complete ruse. It's very Orwellian. It's like doublespeak. The truth is that the anti-wokeism movement is the real threat because they want to create a reality that is completely false and delusional. Anyway, that's all for now. Take care. Thanks for everything, and I'll talk to you again soon.